So the topic for today, I can see we've got 15 or so people in at the moment. Can SCOM really monitor anything? I asked Sean to join me because I will hold my hands up and say I've never built any custom monitoring in SCOM. So yeah, Sean is my backup. He's the brains behind this operation for sure. So I'll help where I can. I might have a few words of wisdom, but I'm pretty much relying on you guys to teach me whether SCOM really can monitor anything. I tell everyone all the time that it can. Mm-hmm. So let's hope I'm right.
I agree with that statement.
Good. Oh,
done.
We're done. We can leave now.
We're done. I think the hardest part of that statement is knowing what you're going to monitor, right? So knowing if it's a performance counter, if it's web URL where you can scrape weather data. I mean, is a perfect analogy that you can go get weather stats and start collecting that on a regular basis. Part of that is just knowing how to get there, right? And what technologies can you use, or what methods you can use to scrape the data. Once you get the data, yeah, you can literally monitor anything. Easy ones are, the performance counters in Windows. If you have an application that is generating, especially homegrown applications or self-developed applications that are generating their own performance counters, yeah, it's real easy. Click, next, create a rule, create a monitor, and you pick up that new performance counter and away you go. We've also even gone as far as, let's look for registry keys that change, not necessarily as often as a performance counter, but we've used those to, kind of build the architecture and some of that CRM type data out of SCOM. So we use registry keys to say this server's in this data center, it's in this rack, it's in this row, it's connected to these ports in the network, yada, yada, yada. And then we could use that for ITIL, or not ITIL, but CRM data, CMDB data. Good grief, my acronyms are off today.
Well, you were right with the ITIL, yeah.
It's part of ITIL, but I was thinking more CMDB data type stuff. But yeah, it literally is just a matter of the method of really getting that data into SCOM, and it really can. I think the classic example of that is the monitoring of the coffee cup, right, or the coffee pot, right? I remember that way back in, what was that, 2007?
It was early, yeah.
Something like that. And I was like, that is cool. And that really inspired me to go, yeah, we can go grab anything we want. I mean, here at my house, I'm a big home automation nut. And so I monitor my power. I monitor the temperatures. I have several, I don't know, probably in the upwards of 50 different temperature monitors that are all over the place now. I'm a beekeeper, so I actually have thermometers and humidity sensors inside the hives. And SCOM is monitoring all that. It literally is my platform to scrape all that data in and present it through dashboards. Maybe one day I'll open that up to the outside world. But it's my own little pet project. It was more for me to figure out what SCOM's capable and what you can do with it. And a lot of that I did just with console tools. It wasn't anything that I went and generated huge management packs, using snippets or anything like that. It was all just basic monitors. I would go and update a performance counter. That's how I would get that data in there.
What I also like about it is that when I go to a customer and I need to implement SCOM, and in most cases, the customers are also asking, can we also take a few Linux machines for monitoring? Can we also monitor our switches or network devices? And I can say, yes, we can cover them all. So from this perspective, it's also, a good argument to implement it. I see a question from what can you not monitor with SCOM? I think it's something we touched yesterday, having the discussion.
What was? I'm curious what you guys said you could not monitor, because I have my own. I'm going to actually take what John said and say I absolutely agree. The biggest problem is finding the data. But when you get into what you can't monitor is when you find the data and the people that have it want it real time. And you end up with like 10,000 things in like 5 seconds. It's like too much. And then you start into the like, why do they want that? Can we aggregate it? And then it's like, no, we want the raw data. It's like, that's not what we do. That's when I get
Yeah, I think the for as I'm thinking of this question, I think really the only place that you would have a problem, what you cannot monitor with SCOM, is a security context. Like if you have a government contract and that environment is sealed and it's literally you have to physically enter that environment to see that environment, that's when you would not be able to monitor with SCOM. If you can get to the data, you can monitor it. It would be either a physical barrier that prevents you from doing it, right? So like a government facility, like NORAD. Obviously, there would not be a SCOM instance sitting outside of NORAD looking into that environment. They would actually install it inside of NORAD and monitor within. But even then, it's monitoring within, right? So it really depends on the security context. I think is probably the biggest hurdle. The second hurdle is where's the data, right? Can you get to the data? If you can get past the security context and access it successfully, then you can.
See, I always keep going back to the Cortec coffee cup example, because that's the perfect example of where you can just get data from somewhere that you really don't think you can get data from. You know, for those of you who haven't seen it, they're monitoring a filter coffee jug by pointing a webcam at it. It's not something that's sort of smart. It doesn't have an API, you know, so you can't sort of pull data from it like you might expect from something more modern, but it's possible.
I remember from SCOM last year, Nathan Foreman's session on using sort of PowerShell to ingest anything, and weather was a great example. Just pulling in like National Weather Service data into SCOM with PowerShell. I mean, that's something I'm actually pretty comfortable with doing. Right? It's when you're getting into some of the terrifying stuff in Visual Studio, like we've seen in the last few hours, that I'm just like, hang on, I'll go back to Azure Monitor and some nice functions for that, please. But I think where you can sort of bring it into the context of using PowerShell, and I mean, when I said at the beginning, I've never actually done anything custom. I guess like Skoda PAs, right? They build custom monitors for enterprise apps. They build user-centric PowerShell-based monitoring. So maybe I have done a little bit of it.
You've done more than you probably think.
Yeah, I was just thinking as well as like what you consider sort of monitoring as well. What you actually think of as monitoring, as opposed to sort of data, just getting data, and I guess it's the end use, right? It's how
that is truly the hardest part, is getting that data, right? And for my context and our apps in house, it's really working just with your developer guys to say, give me a website with some stats on it, right? Give me a /health or a /status. And inside that status, just give me okay or not, or give me, response times or whatever's valuable to that application. Now, some of that, has to be coded. Some of it has to be implemented in SCOM. But once you have that data there, it's very similar. The same concept applies to querying weather data. You're just going to get the data, and now you're, how do you want to present it?
Yep.
We did a coffee break with Silex, with Mike Sargent from Silex, possibly 3 months ago, where he was pulling data from a Skype network, a Skype call quality monitoring thing, and it wasn't sort of something with a nice API. It was a practical example, but they had to take the return of something that would be spat out on screen via batch script from memory, and parse it and strip things off it to get the data into SCOM. It could be done.
And sometimes you need some middleware. So like my example of beehives, monitoring humidity and temperature inside those hives, is the little IoT devices that I use are are very dumb, and they're not reliable whatsoever. And I have some middleware in between. So I literally have a .NET Core website that is going to look at that data constantly. He's bringing that data over. Then SCOM talks to that API website and pulls that data out. It's kind of my middleware to really massage that data and make it more consumable for SCOM just right off of a web URL. And to do it otherwise, it would have been a complete nightmare. So sometimes you do need a little bit of middleware in between that, logic app, Power App, something that gives that endpoint for SCOM to go to get it. Sometimes it's just not available in the native app itself, and you have to do some massaging to get the data you want.
I want to key off of that because that's probably the most difficult part when I deal with the data is, do I need to make sure that SCOM is aware of it? And then how do I get it to then query it? And sometimes, like you mentioned, the middleware piece is key. One of the big things for me was creating fake discovery data and then using that discovery data to then run those other rules and monitor collections so that, feed in a whole bunch of fake data. Suddenly SCOM goes out and does stuff that it would never normally do, but it's normal framework because I created that fake data.
Yeah. And that's the I'll say the fun of building the monitors and rules, right? Because you may run into a system that you've never seen before. There is no management pack out there. You have a good idea of what the data set is going to be, but if I'll use a network of device as an example, a network port, right? When you query it the first time, it's up and running, right? You see the current good state, but you don't see necessarily what the bad state is or what you need to alert on until you break that device. Well, if this is something like a UPS that's in production, how do you break that device so you can know what the bad state is? So there is some cart before the horse scenarios that happen. We had an old crack unit that we wanted to monitor, and we had an SNMP port, and we could see what the good state was, but we had no idea what it looked like when it failed. And so to test it, we had to schedule an outage, and we literally broke the crack unit to see what was coming out, so we could see what those values were, right? And then build alerts and rules and monitors around those. But yeah, some of that is it's all the if the data is just there, it's easy. If it's not, sometimes you need some more middleware. Sometimes you need to think outside of the box and go, well, yeah, what happens if we do shut down that crack unit? Or what happens if we, increase the temperature by blocking one of the ports on the back of that crack unit to really cause that air condition to happen so we can see what the data is coming out? Or you build your management pack around the opposite, right? You kind of use inverse logic, and if it's not equal to okay, then you just send whatever that's coming down, and then you can see that. But yeah, it's a lot of almost development part of building that.
Yeah.
Reverse engineering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say, with all of that, you can do it. The biggest downside is when you do it, you end up owning it.
This is true. Yep. Yeah. Which, being a SCOM administrator in charge of that environment anyway, you may thumb wrestle with your app team that owns that, right? In our case, if it's a homegrown application, we've actually put on a development team. You must provide at least an interface for us to query, right? So we know what your app is doing, and we can notify you that way when it's down. We've put those requirements on them. If you don't have that luxury, like it's a crack unit, right, and just operations owns that, yeah, you're going to own it. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
At Citrix Cloud, when we were building Citrix Cloud, every feature that was engineered wouldn't be able to be released in any form until it had a monitoring plan, which included, but it was all custom code, obviously, which included a bunch of APIs that would let us pull, data that would be able to tell is the feature in question good.
Which most product managers, especially if you're developing your own stuff in-house, they're open to that. They're open to say, as a release cycle, maybe the minimal viable product it doesn't include that, but V1 will. And most product managers I've had interactions with, they're more than willing to do that. Why? Because it's making the software is better and it's going to be more supportable, right? They're going to know when it went down instead of that 3 a.m. call that the website's just not working or the service isn't online.
I've definitely had experiences of both where, we'll get to that in a future vision. And the best sort of counter to that is DevOps. If the person that wrote the code is going to be the one that gets the call in 3 a.m, it's in their interest to make sure that they do everything possible to prevent that 3 a.m. call.
Yep. So that brings up an interesting question about cloud services. One of the issues I ran into in my old shop was we'd bring on these new cloud services and we wouldn't know when it would go down because they wouldn't expose any interfaces or APIs. And so we then had to do synthetics to log in and kind of work with it that way. That was probably a scenario where I had great difficulty monitoring systems. Just because, again, cloud, it was sealed. That'd probably be an example of something I think you couldn't monitor.
But you got around that by using synthetic. So I always look at providers as they're our partners, but they're not perfect, right? And when they're not perfect, I need to know before they know. So we always monitor everything in-house as well as whatever additional monitoring they do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, depending on your service model, agreements and all that fun stuff, that may be their responsibility versus yours. In bigger organizations, especially depending on what the service contracts are out there, you may hire an MSP to do all your monitoring. And there are cases where that happens, and then it's on them. But I think at the end of the day, it still answers the question, is there anything that you can't monitor with SCOM? It really boils down to the security. Can you get there? And then the business processes around it. Is there something business process wise blocking would be really, and then what we just talked about here, where maybe it's the ownership of monitoring belongs to somebody else and it's not available to us internally.
I guess it's sort of a natural extension of it sounds like the technical answer is yes, right? If you can get to the data, then you can monitor it with SCOM. I guess the extension is and should you? Is there always a perk in going for, say SCOM is monitoring everything, you're rolling stuff out in the cloud. Is it worth that pain fighting with engineering teams because they want something shiny and cloud based, or what's the counter argument to just instrument it with Dynatrace, right? What's the counter for do it with SCOM because you can?
I always look at that as how are we providing service to the business, right? We're if you're in the infrastructure side of things, obviously we're providing the VMs that they're running and whatnot. Part of that is just monitoring, right? That's just part of the service offering that we do. Now, depending on how the organization's built, if in a prior life we had 5 divisions, each one of those divisions were in charge of their own infrastructure and monitoring within that. The CIO said that was enough. We need to collapse this into a global monitoring solution so we can have one pane of glass across the entire organization, because that was really being driven from the upper execs. Mm-hmm. The CTO and the CIO and those guys wanted to be able to look at an instance pane of glass to see where is the organization at a given moment, right? Is North America online? Is South America online? Is Australia online? Or is there any problems with network connectivity between, regions? And they wanted to know what that was, because there was many, many different outages that were happening and a lot of red tape in between all that. And so that's what they did, right? A lot of that depends on the organization.
Do you maybe get to a state where you effectively consider that external monitoring tool as your middleware for SCOM and integrate it instead of the end application?
I think if it does it natively, I'll just use a management pack, right? If it's IIS websites, APM type stuff that's already canned, I always leverage that first. If it's something that's obscure and kind of that one-off, that's when you have to look at, okay, how critical is the system? If it's a tier 0 system, yeah, you have to monitor it, right? So then you talk about middleware in between, but then your middleware has to be rock solid as well because it's a tier 0 system. Most of the code that I have that is that middleware, it's talking to some weird device that isn't, I just did it for fun, monitoring beehives. I haven't yet to really see a mission critical app not be supported either by the vendor like HP or Dell or Citrix or something along those lines, or there are management packs that you can purchase, right? So you can go to buy a VMware pack or something that will fill that stopgap. So I tend not to try to code it because that means I have to own it. If I'm doing it for fun and it's kind of throwaway, that it's okay. But if it's mission critical stuff, I tend to lean more on the professional vendors that support all that stuff rather than bake my own tools and rely upon my logic that I may, have not good testing in to do that stuff with.
So on the flip side of that, though, the shop I came from, the group was siloed. And so I would say that even though I had the IIS pack or I had the web monitoring pack or whatever, I would still rely on that team to run their own monitoring tool because they had the deep monitoring that they wanted. And then I would collect what was relevant to share so that management still had their high-level view into it. And if I couldn't get their data, then they just showed red, and then management would call them instead. That's a good case for just letting those teams handle the details, and then we just grab the high-level, fluff at the top.
Yeah.
Make sure that things were running.
We decided to go for a more.
Go for it.
We decided to go for a more central approach. That we've got several agile teams developing either .NET or Java or Uniface or some other exotic options. And we started on Dynatrace because getting all the teams to have sort of the same views, that's almost impossible. Because and there's also the infrastructure side of things. We do everything on-prem. So getting that all together, there's no way you'll manage that, get that in a manageable fashion, license-wise and so on, if you use all sorts of tools.
Yeah. You end up with Go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, there's two things. There's single pane of glass and there's single source of truth. And it depends on what you're intending, trying to achieve as to which kind of makes sense. If it's, I would like to see everything, keep the data where it is sort of generated, single pane of glass, one dashboard that can pull data from multiple places. Squared up comes to mind, obviously, versus single source of truth, which is, we've got 5 monitoring tools. Let's get all of the data from all of those monitoring tools into SCOM. SCOM can be our single source of truth, which you may then stick a single pane of glass on top of, but all the data is in one place.
Yeah, but
and I would add to that the audiences, right? In some cases, maybe Sean's multiple divisions, they don't need single pane of glass because the divisions just roll within themselves. Where ours, it included the executives, so it was everything needed to be in one pane of glass. So it depends on your target audience as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. For SCOM we use, at the risk of swearing in church, we use Vision. Yeah, I know. Like I said, swearing in church.
Gerald, I think you just bought everybody a beer.
Where's the kick
I think so. But anyway, we are reconsidering that because of the Dynatrace stuff. it's just a matter of getting the time to do proper comparisons. But if you have, that's one thing. If you have several monitoring tools, Bruce, you said import all the data into SCOM. That's all very nice. But if you have something that's squared up as a connector to, why on earth?
Why would you?
Yeah.
But usually the answer is it depends on why you want a single source of truth. You know, that's, and then you get into the realms of, you know, you can do it with SCOM, but is SCOM the best tool for that? And you know, and where I'm going with this is CMDB and ServiceNow, basically tools like ServiceNow that have a CMDB, because they are designed to be the source of truth, which SCOM is not. You know, it can do it. It has a really comprehensive object model and health follow-up. So the why are you looking to do that in the first place would be the answer to your question. But yeah, I mean, you know, if you're looking to understand, you know, the monitoring side of things, then yeah, there's no real need, is there, in some cases. Whereas if you're looking to understand what is everything, you know, across all your systems, and that's typically the why.
Yeah, I wish SCOM had more of a CMDB role, right? It does really good discovery, but I think if you partner it with like a ServiceNow or something like that, that becomes a really powerful tool, because then you can go into ServiceNow and define your app groups and the app owners and who's in charge of what, and now you can, you know, roll out, and change management becomes so much cleaner when you know all the dependencies underneath something, especially when you start talking about, you know, more distributed type apps, VMware farms and stuff like that. If you go to touch a VMware farm and you know everything that's underneath it because SCOM has discovered it, and of course, you know, garbage in, garbage out. If that's not maintained well, of course you're gonna, you know, the bigger the organization, the harder that task is. But yeah.
Sean, I know you use SCOM with Service Manager for this purpose, because there is a native integration that does exactly this. It's just a shame that Service Manager, you know, is, I mean, it still exists, but it's, you know, not seen a feature in a while.
True, but to John's point, I used SCOM to populate the CMDB in Service Manager, and then I added all the other stuff in Service Manager, and was then able to then bring it back into Squared Up and then show all of those relationships.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. I've seen several implementations that do exactly that.
Yeah.
So,
How do you handle
really
network
nice
devices in that area?
Say that again.
How about network devices or storage systems that cannot be, well, that could be monitored in SCOM, but
So it all depended. The answer is always it depends, but in the particular case I was dealing with, we had a physical network and we had a wireless network, and then we had the other networking things. And so each of those three categories each had a different tool. One tool that did the physical network had a database. So I wrote a connector to the database, pulled out all the objects, and then I populated them in Service Manager. And then there was a class there that I then linked so that I had relationships that way. I ended up actually coming back to SCOM and writing a custom management pack, bringing them in as dummy objects and then relating them that way. But then the wireless, we were dumping into Splunk. And so I had to go get Splunk data, bring it back out. And I did it that way. So SCOM was in the middle to give it all, but they were dumped in different places, was the short answer.
right.
So Sean, if hypothetically, if you could get the data from wherever it was and just display it without putting it all into SCOM back then, I know obviously this was not yesterday sort of thing, would you have bothered getting all the data into SCOM? Would you have just displayed it from where it lived?
I did not put it all in SCOM, no. If I needed health state or the health tree, then I would put it in SCOM. Otherwise, I would put it in Service Manager, and then I used Squared Up. When I was a customer, I used Squared Up to then display it all, because I didn't care about health, but I did care about the CMDB and the relationships. And then if there was no health, there was always a comment that said, go to this tool to look up the health, and we could go do that. But the moment I needed health information, I brought it into SCOM, and then that's what gave me the health information.
All right.
Makes sense.
Yeah, because I've overloaded SCOM too. I've used SCOM as a repository for things. Dump it into the comment section. You dump it into the custom fields. There's different ways of dumping data in there and then pulling it out with the SQL code.
And destroying the database in the process.
Haven't had that happen yet. But
just try using VMM and then implementing a software-based storage system.
Okay.
That's when you get one discovery importing 20,000 objects and 24,000 relationships.
Gotcha.
And I am speaking from experience.
Yeah, gotta have some huge SQL servers to manage all that.
No, you just need the remove SCOM management pack option. That'll do.
Yeah. I was never happy with the VMM pack.
No, I spoke to Kevin Holman about it earlier today, and he has the same opinion.
It was like the Dell pack, the VMM pack. Not too happy. I did my own things for those.
Yeah. Well, I now work for a company that is not a service provider. I'm just a SCOM guy within the company. But I used to work for a SCOM service provider or consultancy company, and I've actually had customers complaining why SCOM was giving so many alerts on IBM hardware when they didn't have any IBM hardware. And then I asked them, well, who imported the management packs? Huh? Okay.
It's like, yeah, where you get
I had a very nice first day there.
It'd be nice if there was a management pack to discover which management packs to discover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, have something that be able to look at the environment as a whole and say, oh yeah, there's an IBM bias or there's an HP bias or whatever. I am going to now load that management pack.
That already exists. Well, but not in a great way. Microsoft does try to do that.
Yeah, they do. They do show some of the discoveries that are out there.
Yeah, and as more companies get on board with their packs, they can add those, and then it helps for discoverability.
Yeah. The other side of that, I would love to see what like the open source world does, where they have their repos of all these different packages that are out there. I know there's a community one out there that people are starting to contribute to for management packs, right? One place to go get any management pack that you would ever need, and everybody contributes to that. But the other side of that is all the vendors have to, partake. And some of them have, some of them haven't. And you still have to, like HP, you still have to go to their website and you have to dig through their stuff to go find their management packs.
Well, actually, HP's one of the ones that you have to have. It's behind a password wall.
Yep.
So that makes
all the HPE stuff now has been locked down, and you can't get your free biases anymore. You can't get free drivers anymore. I think that was I get why they're doing it. It costs money to develop that stuff. But at the same time, if you have an old piece of iron that you bought on eBay or something along those lines, which there's many companies that do exactly that, it's hard to get that stuff. And then, if you need support for like a management pack, you got to open up some license somewhere, and then you have access behind that paywall. I disagree with that. I think it's, if you have a piece of hardware, you may not put the latest bleeding edge stuff out there to encourage licensing, but put 2-3 reps back, and it may not be supported or whatnot, but at least it's available.
Agree. Don't like that practice. Yeah.
And then there's the vendors that should rethink making management packs and not throw back the performance data they collect for every LUN.
I'm guessing you have a specific vendor in mind.
Yeah, I'm not going to name names. But what they did is they actually collected 5 performance counters over 1,000 times for each of their over 1,000 LUNs.
I can know who you mean then. Okay.
Is that VMM?
No, there wasn't VMM. No, it was there was outside of VMM. It was a storage vendor.
Yeah.
And we figured it out quite quickly actually when the SCOM database ran out of disk.
Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap up in just a second. It's just about closing time. We've just got a couple of bits to do on the stage before everyone sort of signs off. Just to sort of wrap up this session. I came into this sort of with the blind hope that SCOM can monitor everything. Sometimes it's all right to sort of acknowledge that it doesn't need to, and that it's maybe not, maybe there is a best of breed tool that another team can use, and that's okay. So that sort of sum it up for you guys, or are we all diehards? Just put everything into SCOM and shut up about all the other tools.
I think it depends on the situation. I think sometimes, yeah, throw it all in SCOM. I mean, that if it depends on the environment, and sometimes you do have unique use cases where you do have to go outside of a SCOM and do whatever you're doing, and some of that could be business driven, could be technology driven, could be, it just depends.
I think that's the answer, right? That's what I think everyone in the room has currently said that at least 4 or 5 times. It depends. Maybe that's how we wrap this up.
Yeah.
Can it monitor anything? It depends.
Yeah. Well, I would just go around and say, yes, SCOM can do it. Should you?
Yeah.
Is really the question.
You wanted to.
It depends.
Yeah. It depends.
Hey, it's a Microsoft product, isn't it?
It
is a Microsoft product.
Yeah, if you're in the Microsoft stack, I say, hands down, SCOM is where you need to be.
Yeah.
I think it is the best discovery / monitoring / knowledge base that you can have for a Microsoft environment. I don't think anybody comes close to touching that outside of SCOM. Really, in the Unix worlds, you get into obscure languages like Clojure or even some Java. There are better tools that especially in the APM layer. SCOM just doesn't do a good job at that. And again, it depends on your environment and your use case.
Perfect. Right, let's wrap it up there. People can keep chatting on Slack, obviously, if they want to. Let's just head back over to the stage and we'll wrap up 2 more days of SCOMathon for another year. Thank you all for your time. We'll jump back over. Thanks.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.